Hello, my name is Billy Davis, Director of Alumni Affairs here at Prairie View A&M University, and we'd like to welcome you to our Founders Day celebration. This year marks the 144th anniversary of the establishment of the Alta Vista Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas for Colored Youth, formed by the 15th Legislature on August 14, 1876. This institution would later be known as Prairie View A&M University. We recognize our founders as Matthew Gaines and William H. Holland, both born into slavery, but later making history as great African-American political figures in Texas. After the 1863 emancipation was officially announced in Texas on June 19, 1865, Gaines settled in Washington County, Texas, where he established himself as a leader in the freedmen, a Baptist preacher, and a politician. In 1869, Gaines was elected as a senator of Texas's 16th district in the 12th Texas legislature. He gained a reputation for being a guardian of the newly won rights of African Americans in Texas. Throughout his term, he addressed the issues of public education, prison reform, the protection of black voters, and tenant farming reformation. Gaines actively supported the movement that established the first public school system for all Texans and assisted in allowing Texas to take advantage of the Federal Grant College Act, also known as the Morrill Act. William H. Holland was born in Marshall, Texas in 1841. After his father bought his freedom from slavery, he moved to Ohio where he obtained his formal education. With the end of the Civil War, he returned to Texas where he taught school and later was elected to the 15th Texas legislature in 1876 as a representative of Waller County. In the legislature, he sponsored a bill calling for the creation of Prairie View Normal College, now Prairie View A&M University. Fellow African-American legislator Walter Burton promoted the bill in the Senate, and it became law in 1876, thus establishing the second public school of higher education in Texas. Due to Holland's efforts, he became known as the father of Prairie View A&M University. William H. Holland and Matthew Gaines had to be men of great courage to introduce and act on legislation at such a time, bringing forth the first state-supported institution of higher education for African Americans in Texas. This was a bold step, and only the beginning of all the great things that would come from this rural plot of land in Waller County, Texas. We can only imagine the challenges faced in those early years to educate former slaves, making do with little resources and making the possible out of what may have seemed impossible. Surviving the days of segregation and Jim Crow, but still cultivating the minds of so many young African Americans that would go out and transform communities in great and impactful ways. Despite all of the challenges in our history, the university has persevered and continues to seek inventive ways to impact the lives of all people. Our history of producing teachers, engineers, architects, and nurses continues as our students broaden the contributions we've made to society. We continue to be devoted to achieving excellence and relevance in teaching, research, and service. So today, as we celebrate 144 years of the achievements coming from Prairie View A&M University and the thousands of alumni produced from this prestigious institution, we see a bright future on the horizon for Prairie View A&M University, thanks to our founders, leaders, numerous alumni, and students. Our founders would be proud of the accomplishments of this institution as we continue to provide educational opportunities to the youth from the state of Texas and around the world.
Good afternoon. I often say that how one begins a venture is as important as how one carries it forward. A founder inevitably puts in place a set of norms and aspirations that remain long after the founder has left the venture. After all, those who follow are forever measuring progress by the worthiness of the founding act itself. They are forever gauging whether they are remaining faithful to the founding principles. In that sense, the founder's vision, the founder's voice, remain a guide to all those who come afterwards. The constitutional provisions establishing the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas for colored youth were a groundbreaking accomplishment in the context of the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. After Reconstruction, our university saw many changes, including changes in name, changes in affiliation, and some changes in mission. From a technical and normal school, Prairie View graduated over time to a comprehensive university that is mandated to offer the same range and level of study as Texas A&M University. Through all the changes, our fundamental identity remained. That historic act created a pathway for tens of thousands to follow, creating an opportunity beyond slavery and Jim Crow for disenfranchised blacks to enter the economic middle class. The purposeful identification of our university with this compelling need remains with us even to this day. In keeping with our founding principles, we continue to make a way for young people who, but for Prairie View, would be left out of the economic, social, and political mainstream. Over 60% of the students who come to Prairie View come from families with incomes less than $50,000 a year, and many with combined family incomes less than $30,000 a year. And so we continue to honor the purpose of the founding legislation that created our predecessor institutions, creating opportunities for those bypassed by the economic and political structures of the country. Overturning those limitations continues to animate the work of this university. So today, we remain grateful for the foresight that created the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas for colored youth. That this founding act remains relevant over 140 years later is a testament to both the farsightedness of our founders and those who kept their mission alive years after. The country remains greatly in need of institutions like Prairie View to guard against the curtailment of opportunity for individuals standing outside mainstream acceptance and the dominant power structure of the country. And so we pay homage to this proud legacy and acknowledge all those who came afterwards to protect and enhance this university for generations to come.
Hello everybody, I'm Melanye Price, class of 95, Prairie View A&M University, Endowed Professor of Political Science, and now the new director of the Ruth Simmons Center for Race and Justice. Like all of the rest of you, I have been trying to make sense of everything that has happened over the last few months. A global pandemic, a crumbling economy, and continued police and vigilante violence. Each of these issues disproportionately and negatively impacting African Americans. Amid the pandemic and exceedingly high death rates from COVID-19, the nation has taken to the streets once again to assert unapologetically that Black lives matter. Very unpredictably in March, the world just shut down. One week we were making plans and moving around the world, and the next week we were homebound. We are now overdosing on family time and zooming our way through every day. This is not the life any of us would have planned or preferred, but we are here celebrating Founders Day, safely physically distant from one another, but collectively focused on the birth of this great institution. Because I've spent so much time at home, I have had to figure out how to occupy all the time that I would normally have spent running around doing nothing. And I have tried a few things. I quickly abandoned an attempt to learn a second language. I stopped myself from baking. I ran out of puzzles. But one thing that has stuck is a garden. I have planted my first garden, and it has been a steep and surprisingly emotional learning curve. One of the fundamental things I had to learn is the difference between dirt and soil. See, as a person who doesn't even own houseplants, I looked at dirt all the time and assumed it was all the same. But it turns out it's not. In order to grow things, you have to have good soil that has been mixed with nutrients and organic material and fertilizer. It's not just any old dirt. Soil has to be fed, it has to be cared for and nurtured. And if your soil isn't good, there's nothing you can really do to make the things you plant grow. You have to create the conditions that will yield good crops, and the first step is good soil. From its inception, Prairie View has been in the soil business. In fact, these grounds long before our founding was a place where our enslaved ancestors were pressed to work the land of people who thought it was okay to own other human beings. On the Alta Vista plantation, people who look like us, who are connected to some of us by blood and to all of us by a common heritage, were forced to work, as the old folks say, from can't see to can't see. And while they tended the soil and grew crops they would never profit from, they were also creating the fertile conditions in their own minds and actions that would yield them freedom. By the time emancipation actually came, most of the people who were enslaved had legally been born as someone else's property. Slaveholding as an American idea had gone on for centuries, and freedom was something most enslaved Africans had never experienced. But they were clear that it was something they wanted. Using the intellectual tools at hand, wrote memory of Bible verses, stories passed down from generations, traditions that followed them across the ocean. They developed and nurtured a clear vision of freedom and engaged in resistance practices to achieve it. I look around our campus and I wonder, where are the places our ancestors would hide away to dream freedom dreams? I stand in front of All Faiths Chapel and I wonder, is this the place they secretly gathered to beseech their God for liberation? I look at the new stadium and I wonder, was there a brush arbor here where they would go and wail and weep the loss of mothers and sons, of fathers and daughters who had been sold away from here? I walk through our beautiful campus to the Memorial Student Center and I think, is this where they hung the story quilts that were patchwork maps to freedom? I listen in the breeze of the old oaks and I hear an elder like Baby Suggs and Toni Morrison's Beloved tell us, here, she says, in this here place we flesh. Flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. I stand on this soil, this fertile ground, and I wonder if they know now their freedom dreams came true on the very spot and in the same soil of their enslavement. I think, what would they tell us? And I think they would tell us that freedom is a concept once planted in the minds of all human beings must be tended and nurtured. I think they would have told us that as sure as freedom dreams persisted, the desires of the slaveholding class would persist, transform, and endure. They certainly would have warned us that white supremacist notions of Black inferiority would always be in a constant battle with Black liberation. But I also believe they would have told us to revel in the joy that comes from toiling with the people you love. I stand in this soil, well, the sidewalks really, because you know we don't walk on the grass. But I stand there and I remember the 8 young men, the unknown 8, who tried to make a go of this improbable experiment of educating people who a few short years before were legally prohibited from learning to read and write. What was going through their minds the day they arrived at the old Alta Vista plantation? Were they mesmerized by the idea that the place that once dehumanized them was now being used to prepare them to take full advantage of their citizenship rights? I am still in awe of that transformation today. On a more personal level, I have stood in this soil as an 18-year-old who was the first in her family to go away, because I just came from Houston, to college. I have felt the weight of my family's dreams on my shoulders. I've sat in classrooms and learned skills that I continue to use today. I stand in this, my ancestors' soil, and now my soil. And I smile thinking of the laughter and friendships I found in it. Friendships that are still growing and continue to be replenished year by year. I arch my back and push out my chest to tell people about this soil. This fertile ground where engineers and architects and teachers, and like me, its very own professors were planted. It is good ground. It has been nurtured for generations. Before anyone knew we would be an institution of higher learning, our ancestors stood and toiled on this ground. I am grateful, though, that they also dreamed and planned and schemed about a future, a free future. There is no dirt here, only enriched soil where we plant the seeds of hope and excellence for us and future generations. We, the alum and friends of the institution, are just temporary caretakers of this beautiful and historic soil. It is our job to ensure its care. It is our job to refresh its nutrients, to feed this land so that we will continue to produce the leaders that our society yearns for. What will they say about how well our generation did a generation from now? Will they look back on this time as a season of growth and expansion? Will you get your hands dirty and dig in that beautiful soil with us? Will you send your children here to meet the place their ancestors prepared for them? On this Founders Day, let us not just remember the legislators or the principals or the students. Let us also remember those enslaved Africans who prepared this way for us, who tended to the soil in hopes that one day free Black people would populate this land as full citizens. Let us pledge once again to nurture this sacred ground by investing our time, talent, and treasure. Let us recommit ourselves to pursuing freedom in all forms that those founders never experienced, but treasured all the same. Now, I have no idea if I will still be gardening when the world opens up. I'd like to think I might. My crops so far suggest that I shouldn't. But I am sure that this time next year we will find a way to come together and express our gratitude for the founding of our beloved Prairie View A&M University. Thank you.